But you must have a target for seats.
I've got no idea.
Why not? You're the leader.
Because I'm travelling optimistically.
But, OK, but people
I have
will
no
want
targets.
if you say you're going to be a credible opposition, or you want to be a credible opposition, you will need seats. So how many...
We're going to win seats. How many, I don't know. If this momentum continues, at the moment, we're rising 1% a day in the polls. That's been pretty consistent over the last 10 days. If that continues, who's...
You know that feeling when someone walks into a room fully prepared, completely unbothered, and just absolutely dismantles everything thrown at them? That is exactly what Nigel Farage did when he faced a BBC interview clearly designed to trip him up, slow him down, and make him look like a reckless political troublemaker. Yet he turned the whole thing completely upside down. A man called out for using customary inflammatory language live on air, who accused the BBC of running scripted attacks against him, dismissed the line of questioning as boring, and reportedly walked away from the entire encounter with an on-air apology from the very broadcaster that tried to take him down.
Do you recognise that some of the language you've used before, and members of the Reform Party have used around immigration, is divisive and inflammatory?
I don't think anything I've said is inflammatory. What I've said is that for 50 years, we had net migration into Britain of 30 or 40,000 a year. That from the late 1940s right up until the millennium. That now, under a Conservative government, net migration is running at 750,000 people every year. For example, we have to provide a new home every 2 minutes in this country just to deal with net migration. I've argued that our infrastructure is crumbling. I've argued that our health service can't cope.
I do want to kind of clear up figures. Where
Yeah.
did you get every 2 minutes a new home is created for a migrant?
A migrant a minute comes to Britain. A migrant a minute.
Let's set the scene first, because context here is everything. The BBC has had a long and complicated relationship with Nigel Farage. And by complicated, I mean years of treating him like a problem to be managed rather than a politician to be interviewed. This isn't a new complaint. BBC presenter Geeta Gurumurthy once cut away from one of Farage's press conferences about migration in Dover, describing him as speaking with his customary inflammatory language live on air, casually editorialising as if it were normal on a supposedly neutral public broadcaster. And what happened? The BBC had to issue a formal apology, admitting it was an impartiality breach. Yet the apology changed nothing, because the culture that produced that comment didn't vanish. It just got quieter. And this interview is proof of exactly that. The same instincts, the same playbook, the same goal: make Farage look extreme, discredit his positions, and move on. Except this time, Farage didn't just push back, he exposed the entire game while it was being played.
How many migrants are you saying come to Britain?
Well, 2.5 million have come to Britain over the course of the last 2 years. In fact, 1 in 30 people on the streets of Britain today has come in the last 2 years.
Now, that figure, I will say...
Which is extraordinary.
That figure, we have fact-checked that figure, and that figure takes a look at the people who are coming in and hasn't accounted for the people who have left.
A migrant a minute is net, but the gross figure is 2.5 million people.
1 in 30 is not net, is it?
And here's the thing. Half of those that have come aren't coming to work. They're coming as dependents.
Where did you get that figure?
52% that have come as dependents. We've even allowed 125,000 people...
Who in the future could work, yeah? Children
well,
don't come over here and not work, do they?
This is making us poor.
The interview opens, and you can almost feel what's coming. The presenter enters with that very particular BBC energy, measured, composed, slightly superior, and immediately launches into a line of questioning that feels less like journalism and more like a prosecution brief, the type where every question is framed to assume the worst, and every follow-up is designed not to explore but to corner. Yet Farage, sitting there completely calm with not a flicker of stress on his face, clocks it immediately, and within minutes calls the questions boring, not aggressive, not outrageous, just boring. And honestly, that's a more devastating critique than anything else. Because it signals, I have heard all of this before, I am not scared of it, and I am genuinely tired of how predictable you are. This is not a man on the back foot, but one who has been through this rodeo so many times that the establishment's best shots no longer even surprise him. And though the presenter, to her credit, keeps going, you can sense the shift in energy. The script isn't working.
The size of the national cake, actually, GDP per capita per person has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. A massive influx of unskilled labour has driven down productivity, but intolerable
Productivity
pressure.
was an issue long time before migration
yes, and it's getting
became
worse.
a political
And it's getting
issue.
worse. So look, all I'm arguing is common sense. We're living through a population explosion. We can't cope. It's making us poorer, and our living standards.
Let's talk about the illegal migrants and border control exchange, because this is where Farage is in his absolute element. He's been pushing this position for years, and the establishment has spent those same years trying to frame it as dangerous, as extreme, as beyond the pale. Yet the uncomfortable truth is the numbers don't lie, and Farage knows them better than most of his critics, hammering the point that record high net migration figures aren't just a cultural or social issue. They're an economic one, with GDP per capita falling even as the total economy grows, because the pie is being divided among more people without making the pie itself bigger fast enough. And when the presenter tries to push back, soften the framing, pivot to nuance, or introduce complexity, Farage doesn't take the bait. He stays on point. The border is broken. Illegal migrants are coming in, unchecked, and the Labour government, rather than fix it, would rather attack the people raising the alarm. An essential point we'll come back to.
Appalling about it.
The fact that young kids can't get houses, the fact that rents are up over 20%
So
over the last 3 years.
you're blaming migrants.
I'm blaming
for
the
that.
population explosion. It's as simple as that. The Conservatives promised in the last 4 manifestos to reduce the level of net migration. In fact, in 3 of them, they promised to tens of thousands a year. It is now 750,000. That is a complete breach of trust with the British public. And the Labour Party, Keir Starmer yesterday, set out his 6 priorities.
Here's where things get genuinely fascinating. Farage pivots smoothly and with perfect timing to the Labour government's response to Reform UK's rise in the polls, painting a damning picture. Because rather than engaging with Reform UK's policies on their merits, rather than saying, here's why our immigration approach is better, here's our actual plan for the border, here's how we're fixing the welfare system, Labour has reportedly descended into personal attacks, which Farage points out with that very particular calm he carries when he knows he's got you, essentially saying, look at what they're doing, simple as that, noting publicly that this pattern has been obsessive with the Home Secretary, the Health Secretary, all of them in on it, a constant attack on him and what he stands for, and in Farage's framing, every personal attack from a Labour minister is just more proof that the political elite is rattled.
One of the big problems we've got is we have more and more people, young people too, living off welfare. And it's costing us over £100 billion a year. What we want to do, and there's a trap here, you see. You're on benefits, you go back to work, you work more than 16 hours a week, the tax kicks in, you may as well stay on benefits. There is a terrible trap.
So hence the rationale to raise the tax threshold.
Absolutely.
That 100 billion, you say, is that from young, do you say that number's from young people not working? So
no,
that's
that is
the
the
whole
benefits
on
bill.
benefits.
However, since the pandemic, a growing number of young people are saying they've got all sorts of psychological problems, but they're also not incentivised.
Now, let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in these kinds of interviews, young people. Because while the mainstream political narrative treats the youth vote as a monolithic bloc focused on climate change and social justice, and yes, some of them do care, Farage has been making a different argument, raising concerns about young people being trapped in what he calls a harsh state tax system, which in practice means a young person getting their first job is already paying income tax, national insurance, and every time they buy something, VAT, keeping people dependent rather than empowered, and the political establishment has no real incentive to fix it, because dependent voters are predictable voters. It's a cynical reading of the system, but hard to argue with when you look at the numbers on youth home ownership, youth employment conditions, and the explosion in means tested benefits. And this isn't a fringe argument, it's the lived reality for millions of young Britons. And Farage is one of the very few politicians saying it out loud.
Looking to the IFS, or taking a look at the IFS, looking at your proposals for changing the Bank of England's function, and that is a very difficult and long process. That is very technical. That would not happen immediately.
Well, no other central bank in the world does this. This is a complete racket with the banks. And interestingly, Paul Tucker, a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, fully endorses our plan, as do a growing number of economists. But look, I'm going to launch, and by the way, I won't call it a manifesto, because the word association with manifesto is lie. I'm going to launch our contract on Monday, where I'll lay out all of the costings of our plans. All I can tell you is what we're doing is bold and imaginative.
Then there's welfare reform, and this is where Farage goes full fireworks, laying out a blunt position. The current welfare setup is unsustainable, unfair, and failing the people it was designed to serve. With billions poured into a system that both neglects British citizens genuinely in need and is exploited by people with no legal right to be in the country, while Farage argues that a reform government would put British people first, not as a slogan, but as actual policy, prioritising welfare payments for citizens, directing resources at those who have contributed to the system, and designing a benefit structure to lift people out of dependency rather than lock them into it. Because a welfare state that cannot be sustained is not a welfare state. It's a political promise that eventually collapses under its own weight, and when it collapses, the people who suffer most are those who need it most, which isn't a right-wing position, but simply basic logic.
Can I ask you, do you think then that you are more patriotic than the other party leaders?
Without a doubt.
What's your evidence for that?
D-Day. D-Day does it for me. I mean, it's very interesting.
I did say I did say the other party leaders.
Yeah,
and I'm putting you're here as a party leader. We will be speaking to all the party leaders. You are sitting here saying, hold on, let me just finish the question if I may. You are saying you are more patriotic than any of the other party leaders who are standing in this general election. On what basis?
I wouldn't take my poppy off out of embarrassment, because that's what Keir Starmer did last year. Please ask him when he's here, why at one point in the morning is he wearing a poppy, and at another moment, speaking to a Muslim community, he takes the poppy off.
And that is your evidence for saying you're more patriotic?
I reckon that's pretty strong, don't you?
But the moment, and I mean the moment, that this interview becomes something you absolutely must watch is when Farage turns his fire directly on the BBC itself, and he doesn't just criticise them, he diagnoses them, accusing the BBC of acting as what he calls a silent enforcer for the political establishment, a broadcaster that claims to be neutral and to speak for the public interest, but in reality serves as a gatekeeper for the status quo. Which is a serious accusation when you think about it. The BBC is publicly funded. Every UK household with a television is required by law to pay for it. And that public money, according to Farage, is used to run an institution that systematically works to suppress voices, challenging the political elite's grip on power, pointing to the very interview happening in front of viewers as Exhibit A, with questions that aren't curious but preloaded, pre-targeted, and designed to wound rather than illuminate, making the deeper accusation that the BBC doesn't just lean left on certain issues, but actively works to protect a political class ordinary people are increasingly turning against even more credible.
This is now a matter of national security.
Nigel Farage with his
customary inflammatory language there at a Reform UK press conference. He declined to stand for a seat, but we will have more on what Farage is saying. Now, an apology. Earlier today, we heard live from Nigel Farage speaking at that election event we just saw. And when we came away from his live speech, I used language to describe it, which didn't meet the BBC's editorial standards on impartiality. I'd like to apologise to Mr Farage and viewers.
And this is the part that should make every person paying a licence fee sit up and take notice. Because what Farage is describing isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a documented pattern. In 2024, a BBC presenter called his language customary inflammatory while cutting away from his speech live on air. The BBC apologised, but nobody was fired. Nobody had to answer hard questions about how that framing made it onto live television in the first place. And it happened because it reflected the BBC's internal culture. A culture where Farage is treated as an acceptable target, his voters as a problem. And balance means giving roughly equal time to 4 mainstream parties, while Reform gets interrogated like a suspect, which isn't impartiality but managed hostility. And the public knows it. 500,000 people a year are refusing to pay the licence fee. Yet Farage sits there calm, measured, occasionally amused, systematically turning every loaded question into an argument for why the establishment is the problem. A skill born of years of being in these rooms, facing these interviewers, surviving these ambushes. He doesn't fight the frame, he dismantles it. And when he calls the questions boring, he isn't being dismissive out of arrogance, but because he's genuinely heard it all before. And he's still standing. Good.
What I'm saying is this. We have a Labour Party that's won already. The election is over. We all know that. Your viewers all know that. Their thinking on economics, on all of the key issues of our lives, is actually remarkably similar to the Conservative Party. I'm arguing that for democracy to work, governments need to be challenged. And I think I'm in a far better position to do that than either Ed Davey from the Lib Dems, and Rishi Sunak won't be there. But the Tories are so divided, they don't stand for anything. This is about, look, we are completely in the grip of big corporate businesses. That's who the politicians listen to. I know that from 20 years in the European Parliament. There are 5.5 million people out there, men and women, running small businesses, acting as sole traders, that frankly are having the most difficult time. I'm on their side.
So, let's bring it all together, because this interview matters beyond just being great television. Reform UK is leading the polls. Labour is resorting to personal attacks because it can't win on policy. The BBC is running interference like a silent enforcer and getting caught doing it. Young people are realising they're trapped in an economic system that was never designed to help them. And Nigel Farage, a man dismissed, ridiculed and written off more times than anyone can count, keeps showing up, saying the quiet parts loud and winning the argument as the presenter tried everything. In the playbook, pressing him on immigration, questioning his framing, challenging his welfare positions, trying to fluster him, get him off message, paint him as dangerous. Yet the BBC walked in with a plan to undermine Farage and walked out having handed him footage his supporters will share for months. A man calling out customary inflammatory language and getting an apology. A man calling the questions boring and being right. A man accusing the establishment's favourite broadcaster of being its silent enforcer, with the interview itself proving the point in real time. And if you were designing a moment to illustrate everything Farage says about the media establishment, you couldn't do better. And the remarkable thing is he didn't need to shout or be outrageous. He just needed to show up and let the BBC be the BBC. They did the rest themselves.